There are transitions from the March calendar is what all the others in general over there to read. But I assure you I was watching this thesis is very clear and painted so far. No serious scientific objections to the thesis Hartmann followed. Proved that she's actually due to confusion arising then in the chronicles rewrite in later periods. We have changed the date of the Mongol campaign for a year and that indeed. The Mongols did not slacking in the steppes in the 37th year. They are still in the 36th year. After defeating somewhere in August, September, October Volga Bulgaria in November, they began to shrink to Russian borders, and in December of 1236 Mongol horde fell upon Russia. And it can take many technological distractions. And most importantly from the point of view of the military, is like that correct? Or what, because always didn't understand why the Mongols do so slowed down. Right, lost the offensive Genghis Khan would never of such ado. Not let the army of the Mongol brought Subutai-bagatur his best student, and the best the commander, but if the cardboard. Right, and immediately after the defeat of Bulgaria did not lose a tempo. The Mongols came to the Russian border, began on the river Voronezh, gathered here troops waiting for the winter, began to prepare for the invasion of Russia. Then everything becomes logical and hard to understand, cause page full. Russian history. Well, let's just say if I call on our Turkic brothers not apply to disputes and origin of their people as a desperate national vendetta between the Turks and Mongols today, because it is very foolish to look at the cost as disputes with the French and the Germans, 19th century, about who this Kola great German learned French, and he was neither the one nor the other. Tries total ancestor here for sure, so I can speak Russian, don't take Rus as their ancestors, only exactly the same ancestor of modern Russia as Kievan Rus of Kiev, by the way, is a reference of words, was not such party, never simply the Rus were Vikings, Slavs, Turks, you did it all. Our ancestors. Then another has to say about the national, the Russian nobility, and or cultural Russia. You will be surprised how much tests with these relationships, and how silly to share today's medieval history. This is now our Russian, this bad Mongol Tatars, evil fiends, so wrong feel about the story, without anger and partiality for me personally, and those who came to fight to Voronezh and shores of Ryazan forces in 1236 it our, and those who fought with them the troops of Batu Khan, also our, and live in position, one of the former rates of the Golden Horde. For me the Golden Horde same my country like ancient Rus. We will see later how much Rus actually took from the Horde, even in the 15th century, when the tale of the Battle of Kulikovo was written. There are historians who believe that it was written in 1560. The 15th century is just the earliest dating of the end of the 15th century, with the planting of Kulikovo was in 1380, and accordingly after a long time. Already during the creation of the legend of the Mamayev massacre, the Russians who defeated Mama named in this legend behind the forest horde, and Belayu horde Zaleski. That's right. Well, if looking ahead, all this is just the Mongol troops began in the late autumn of 1236. They reached the borders of Russia. Did Russia expect their invasion? It is usually believed that Russia was taken by surprise practically from the German fascists. On June 2241, peacefully sleeping on the airfields caught our aircraft gouging, and away from the aircraft. It was not so. On 20 June of the invasion of the Mongols, too. All it was not the Russians knew about the impending threat, but unlike the Volga Bulgars did nothing to unite and resist the threat of the southern Russian princes, just stayed in an endless safari for the city of Kiev, which passed from hand to hand just before the Mongol invasion it defeated in 1235, and then again. There is always a mess in the struggle for this Kiev. I participated in the end. He will get them, Daniel of Galicia, who cast it adrift, leaving only the governor, and he will flee, and their country is also the way. The caste will flee the Hungarians, and then here And the princes of the north was to Yuri of Suzdal, the great prince which had a large army, but what he has done for the defense of the country from the impending threat. But I say that he knew where this information is very simple, 1201-35. And that's the exact date is pretty difficult to set, whether the 37th, whether 36th year in general. As it is here in these years, visited these places, the Hungarian friar Julian spy missionary. Well, scout, and this the Hungarian friar Julian described the situation just before our why. Is there to understand how it happened here, even here was driving through the forest steppe areas, where already scoured Mongolian groups, and caught the Mongols. The fact that he directly says that he talked with one of the Mongol commanders are there, for you told him he could let go by the way and here. And this the Hungarian friar Julian described the situation just before our why is there to understand how it happened here, even here was driving through the forest steppe areas, where already scoured Mongolian groups, and caught the Mongols. The fact that he directly says that he talked with one of the Mongol commanders are there, for you told him he could let go by the way and here. He did not know where to send his troops to the Russian borders in different directions. And maybe that's why he did not send an army to Ryazan. You will send and cut out, and the Mongols will come from the Volga and come along. But still it looks like he was just not ready for a land war. And therefore he himself struck Subutai in winter. It turned out to be a strategic surprise for him. Also drawing your attention to the fact that the new dating of the Mongol invasion, which removes this long period of 1237, which the Mongols spent in the southern steppes, turns the entire company into one continuous campaign starting from the Urals and, yes, almost to Novgorod, one strategic operation of incredible scale, which has been unsurpassed since then. Even the Great Close War at such a depth of offensive operations were not carried out by any country, from the Urals to Novgorod up to 1200 versts, while Barbarossa choked on the approaches to Smolensk, and the Vistula-Oder operation was 500 kilometers deep, but it only covered more territory. That is, the achievements of Freedom Bogota and 1236 course. This is the main argument for those who say that he was just a bad strategist, but let's face it, Yuri II of Suzdal was not a great warrior. He was that Mongol who distinguished himself in the war by suffering a terrible defeat in the battle on the Lepets River, where more than 10,000 warriors were lost at the table by the Suzdalians, and apparently he was so-so. So what we have is what we have. So the Angolans approached the Ryazan borders and waited. They did not attack because they needed the rivers to rise with the freedom of Bogota, who conducted a strategic reconnaissance in 1223, and fought with a bang from 1229. Russians knew perfectly well what a Russian winter was, and the Mongols were not afraid of the fact that in Mongolia the winter was no milder than the Russians. They were accustomed to frosts, and he saw frozen Russians, and the rivers were excellent roads in order to penetrate into the depths of Russian lands. And besides, for him the first logistical task was how to feed a huge cavalry army. That is, actually Russians simply did not have such a large number of horses, and there was nothing to feed them, so he figured out how to do this. In Russian villages and villages, they store livestock feed for the winter because Russians have stable animals, and, accordingly, at the beginning of winter, the maximum amount of fodder in all these villages, towns and villages is, well, there will be horses for people there. And if you go to defeat the Russians, and then go all over the country capturing this truck, which is great, the Mongolian cavalry will be equipped with everything they need. But the problem is, of course, this approach also had its problems. KORG horses can cause all sorts of diseases, but the Mongols did not. All horses were Mongol Ki, who from under snow hunted their own food, and by the way, a hoof in the Russian dance. From the snow, a little miracle to be here. Most of the horses, They had already local black and Volga Kazakh steppe horses supplied. That is not necessary to think that all Mongols rode on horses Przewalski, which rate not shod hoof snow half a meter in their odd there. Picked out no. Of course here is a forage grain for spruce, and this search of forage will be the main. The task therefore was all planned out very clearly once set off winter and the river stood. The Mongols went camping and this has not happened. Yet occurred negotiations as usual. The Mongols sent to Russia ambassadors. Of one of the ambassadors saw the monk Julian, and left of him messages from other because fixed Russian chroniclers wait. I'll tell you about this ambassador that surprise saw unjuster. Message saw him, and the great Prince Shuisky Yuri pass seized. From Mongolian ambassador letter of Batu, to Hungarian cradle forth, which took Polovsian, have yourself and shelter. They provided a translated one of their pagan arrangement Juliana, the letter that looks so Yukon ambassador to the King of Heaven, to whom he gave the power above the ground to elevate everything to me, and crush against flammable marvel, you the king in another. Retelling of the Hungarian king, even though I was 30 times sent to you ambassadors. Why are you not one of them? Send the stones back and their ambassadors in PCS. I don't know what to send you. King is rich and powerful and a lot of soldiers under you, and one you rule the great kingdom. That is why you hard to willingly submit to me, and it would be better and more useful for your Hungarian king, even though I was 30 times sent to you ambassadors. Why are you not one of them? Send the stones back and their ambassadors in PCS. I don't know what to send you. King is rich and powerful, and a lot of soldiers under you, and one you rule the great kingdom. That is why you hard to willingly submit to me, and it would be better and more useful for you if you had submitted to me voluntarily. I would have learned that you keep my slaves, the Cumans, under your protection. The Cumans are the Polovsians, and I order you not to keep them with you in the future, so that I do not turn against you like Cain. The Cumans are easier to escape than you, as they live in tents without houses. You, on the other hand, have castles and cities. How can you escape my hand? If we shoot, save us, you won't do anything, and the Mongols are already climbing in. And in general Ryazan fought for 6 days and 6 nights continuously, alternating with each other. Mongol detachments attacked, stormed, fired, burned through walls and successfully penetrated. And these attacks became more and more difficult to repel until Ryazan was taken. It was almost completely destroyed, but not all. As usual, the stories of the wholesale extermination of the Ryazanians are greatly exaggerated, since the city will then recover very quickly in the same place, and will last until the beginning of the 14th century. But what was a significant defeat of the fortress and the extermination of the defenders was in the tactics of Subutai-bagatur, and was the most important psychological device. The Mongols rushed to cut 2 Oki columns from the 1st of January. There was a great battle where a hastily assembled squad Vladimir tried to block the way, or die. Grand Duchy of Vladimir in this battle was lost. Son of Genghis Khan Bag. It was the only case when the son Genghis Khan died, not only in general. When Genghis Khan Mongolkans fell in dangerous situation in the battle, were killed or wounded. We saw that Genghis Khan was wounded many times in combat. Sam is that many military leaders Mongolian die battles end up very soon. After the march on Russia 1259, the great Khan monk die in Sichuan, killed by an arrow from Chinese crossbow, is at least the most likely the version of his death. While trying to hide this fact, the Mongols, and they say that Han just got sick and died, but there is evidence that the Chinese crossbow still fall in the Great Khan. And if you get iron arrow from a crossbow to survive, it is very difficult. That is, it was not so unique as is often the case. Talk about it. But the son Genghis Khan died in battle. Of all children, Genghis Khan was one. However, Russian defeat drank the midst of battle Muscovites. who are involved with their regiment's Russian series, ran headlong into a panic together. As their leader Prince Vladimir Ilyich after these entire front of the Russian troops collapsed and the Mongols, as usual arbitrariness, beating the fleeing column, was convicted taken after the Mongols moved along the well-trodden road to Moscow, which in those the time was a small fortress, occupied about a third of the current Kremlin Borovitsky Hill. See, the Kremlin is the third part of the Kremlin is a very small town, well, actually a superb settlement, as we saw too, was small. It is generally my little town, little small population of inhabitants in the cities, is normally that Moscow is a small wooden fortress on top Borovich Hill. 5 days fought the great Ryazan capital city, where he was under 20,000 inhabitants, probably one of the largest cities of Russia, little Moscow too, which you almost as many Muscovites, its disgraceful escape from near Kolomna redeemed heroic resistance on the walls of his Borovets, who the Kremlin nonetheless of course. The city was destroyed by the son of Grand Duke George Vladimirs, the who did not escape in the grass again. He chickened out. He surrendered. Moscow captured it, brought the beginning of February to the walls Vladimir, where the Mongols were the 3rd or the 4th of February, and they showed Prince Defender, which caused great confusion in the ranks defending the fortress, and when they opened the gates, they just killed him, and after this it started storming of Vladimir's. What Yuri II could not expect, the result is that all his wise policy the month of February and winter, his face will be besieged. Formidable army of conquerors, armed by his own army, will be dismantled as part of the smashed part has not been collected yet. Yuri II he fled to a tributary of the Volga River, where he began to assemble a new army in the forests. In 3 days, the Mongols stormed Vladimir, took it with their usual tactics. They drove the entire population of the neighboring city of Suzdal to Vladimir, who had been there for a long time, without a fight. They took him into a ball, drove him to Vladimir, sent him to the walls, broke through the walls with vices, and then broke into the city, and in 3 days captured the capital of the great principality of Vladimir, after which the Mongol troops stripped off and went all over Russia. And when they ran out of fodder, they ran out of fodder for the whole horde, and therefore it was a forced step they passed through. How often the crest of the Russian villages, the peasants ran into the woods. I didn't find some there. They captured and searched for grain, which is why I say this, because there are excavations on the Mongols' way back to the steppes in the Verkhnyoki region, where Chernigov lands were already in the Kozelsk region. So there the city of Saransk, neighboring Kozelsk, was taken by the Mongols, and it was planted, burned down, and a large number of barley crops were found in this fire. The location of the grain fodder there was such that it was pointless to be distracted by the universal one. The Mongols, who were just a seamstress, if it weren't for this fodder, they needed it to feed their horses, so they didn't burn the grain on purpose. But the grain, and I got the oil to Kozelsk, not for the same reason. I'll go because there was a lot of fodder there. They weren't looking for fodder. The big problem, Yuri II could not lead his own troops. His children's ears are a mess. There is a report about a battle in which he was suddenly attacked by the Tatar warriors Burundi, who had previously defeated the Volga Bulgaria, at the very moment when the Mongols are passing through northeastern Russia with fire and sword. It turns out that his path from Kiev, the last message there, to Kiev and Vladimir, where he appears in March 1237 after the departure of the Mongol troops, runs through the territory where the Mongol troops passed through as he passed through them, and his son at that time, Alexander, the future Nevsky Lokuntenens of my word, remains in Novgorod because Yaroslav, before going to Kiev, was the Prince of Novgorod. Then he was called by a Kievan that Pereslava went there. His son was left without you. Prince Yaroslav bought, calmly passing through the lands occupied by the Mongols, devastated by the Mongols, to Vladimir, and Alexander is in Novgorod, but no one is on his feet. everything is coming back. This version is that Yaroslav Sel, defending his relations with the Mongols, did not start after Bat and returned from Europe to the lower Volga. Ini entered her while she was still naturally accepted, and now I see some historians and quite a support, and at least as accurately say that there is reason assume that relations with Batu Yaroslav began in 1236, 7 years in the time of the invasion of Russia, that it's not so easy. Barbecues were such a habit. They always sought a fifth column within countries. Which wins? No wonder Subutai-bagatur lured his side Bashkirov. No wonder they found the accordion and Jack in the Volga Bulgaria, which is at least temporarily surrendered to the Mongols. No wonder they have Mordovia. They found the Prince Mordovian, who went over to their side. Single Prince Mordovian fought fiercely with the Mongols to the end of the saw into the swamp and a warding mark there, so it's not took until the very last moment he resisted. And the other, the Prince of Mordovskaya, went to the world with the Tatars. You obeyed them by including their army and marched along with them in a campaign and Russia further into Europe and came to Silesia. And he died there in Silesia in Poland. It Mordvina suggests horror on the Europeans with their cruelty, for their bravery with their ferocity. Each country they have found such quislings, and South Russia when you go Subutai-bagatur. Through southern Russia Bolkovsky princes go to the side of the Tatars, will provide them with food and troops, because purely to prepare for type in the whole of southern Russia what it is there, for the whole body of the Polovtsian Black Hoods and Russian who, together with the Mongols to move to Hungary, right what the Russians are coming together with the Cumans in front of the Mongols, and in such numbers that we could not see. There are some Russian Cumans, but it turns out that in northern Russia, and like no one in Ryazan, will be the prince who will move to the side of the Mongols. Oleg of Ryazan, the other is not he who in the Battle of Kulikovo, of course, Brodniki again. Remember all this system, and here, as there would be doubt for, I do not think that it was probably and fig typical insidious, unscrupulous finder. Throne Yaroslav saw in motion Mongol hordes' opportunity to get their hands on the great Vladimir reign and cleaned it, because after the defeat principality of Vladimir, death of his brother George, of the death of the other princes, including Cornflower Rostov, the death of the children of Yuri who were all killed by the Mongols, he was left alone with the president. So the most severe, the most significant contender to the throne, and Tatars approved and Batu. Then we will issue a label on the great reign of why they went. Very interesting. Yaroslav is Grand Duke of Russia, is not just there to some. He did everything, and Russia will get a shortcut that and over Kiev. Alexander Nevsky, and then the Grand Prince of Kiev. About few people know, found out he would be Nevsky. It will be of Kiev by the Mongols and young hands, and with the title Grand Duke of Russia, and Plano Carpini about it, to write that Yaroslav and tell the Russian prince was poisoned. Here insert points and which movie, so on. We are still going to say, but I will not insist on this version. Everyone can think differently. I believe that there are grounds to assume that some Russian very core and resistance principality of Vladimir, the top part of the, defected to the Tatars, and certainly explains a sense of calm Mongols of the steppe. They were not worried for his rear in defeated, and Russia is that they did not go for a new. Why would she go the trade route along the Volga? Punched Vladimir principality of obstacles. It moves the path of movement of caravans, destroyed, and now there will be subordinated to the great prince himself, and sits his son. Our people, all is well. The task is done. Mongol leaves, but necessary explanation of this hypothesis, but again the same way, which does not scratch a rose. Yaroslav E. His son Alexander Nevsky will be a voluntary convinced and followers with the allies of the Mongols on Russia, and but for the fact that in 1252, when a brother, the brother of Alexander Nevsky, Andrew, along with Daniel of Galicia, raise a coordinated uprising against the Mongols, Alexander Nevsky to go to the horde from whence cometh, not lying I'm lying, which defeat of the brother and the Mongol sabers Alexander will be approved by the Grand Duke Vladimir Mongols Alexander Nevsky, to go to the horde from whence cometh, not lying lying which defeat of the brother. And the Mongol sabers Alexander will be approved by the Grand Duke Vladimir. Why was the departure from the system? It's not just the violence. That an elaborate system decapitation hostile to people, why this system worked failed. This happened in the history of the Mongolian for display only in one case if the ruling circles were in agreement with the invaders and voluntary submission to the Mongols. Before it was released on one street, Yuri II lot went. Cornflower Rostov also did not go. The Prince of Kozelsk not go, and in the Battle of the Kalka involved, so must be punished this whole town. But Yaroslav, which was not at war with the Mongols, his son went and got his year right, was Karl Marx. But when he said that the Tatar cavalry Moscow rose and became Russia's complex things history, to come to her, to be honest, it is not given other moral values. That Dostoevsky closer all the history, and Dostoevsky said that the human soul, the devil, is struggling with God, and the one who take the top, so the man himself, and manifests itself in the history of the same people during here. Please you live the story, that is the real situation here. And so you say, who was Genghis Khan of the Turks? If you're here, much more interesting questions, which of course as a greater, and Mongols among themselves, as fighting for Genghis Khan, and gloss over the inconvenient side history, and Russia's something that's happening everywhere. The same. And in Germany, also I assure you, in France, in Spain, in Dagestan, their united minds shared the whole legend, have created their history. We are nowhere, so the real story is she much more complicated, as real life is much more complicated than those stories that we art the movies show. They went from Russia, and certainly not because of Thor, those who are talking about the roads as the cause of the retreat of the Mongol Tatars from Novgorod. At least they're in the form of whether Thor Russian villagers. The townspeople sit in the city on the pavement, and they thaw this water, which runs into the sewer, the pipe. And I often ride today on the roads, on rural roads in the province. Thaw no, today is a big problem. We have today closed many directions for the rise of the water. We have today many villages are cut off for a few weeks from the entire outside world because to them there is no passage. Imagine what was in the 13th century, when roads were not was one direction / is a disaster in the territory of Russia. Grus just stopped all traffic. That river has just opened then for him not to pass the winter. Have all collapsed on country roads, do not pass without reproach. Where the Mongols could with his hordes of horses on these roads rasses him to move. When the grain is all eaten, their own farm bed, and these horned cattle, which there where she kept it, that same jacket they garnered, this plant, this grain, this fodder. And note that it is Russia here. Fodder was always a problem. Therefore, the fact that in December, in January, Mongol easily found in the Russian village, they are already in the month of March on were labor. Why they are in this universe rushed. Because I was feed for horses. If they are one mountain was caught Thor, they told me where they went. There would have killed all fly at random cases of a horse and behind him human. And they went well. And in addition, we must not forget that it was all of March 17. Like as Marta proved to cross to the Mongols, rode through several years. April 5th, 1242, place ice on ice Lake Peepsy here today, the 5th of April. Come on, Lake Peepus, there is no fall. And Pamina are not present because of global warming. Then there was snow, winter, cold. The 13th century is the beginning of the Little Ice Age, which will cover the ways to Grumant on the White Sea to Svalbard, way to Holland to America, which the Vikings opened cold. So it was with us, of course not so. They were still surrounded by roads, but retreated in the period when I'm from the south. Dew rolls poking of heat, and it melts, and escape route hordes from the northeastern Russia. And Evelina, who just endured on the Mongol Tatars, against the Nazi invaders. In this case, it is very clearly noticed that the movement back and Mongolian troops is not on the eyelids and on the watershed between the rivers, where it first went snow on the tip the sun much faster. Still that watershed Angola went, and this path led them straight under wall Kozelsk. And the economy is clearly the merger of the sisters, and the second man of the two rivers, and it was about the same cape as resolve sharply settlement. Only more strengthening is more serious, and take it during the thaw it was much harder. So you are stuck there, but let's face Eastern Chronicle do not confirm the heroic tales of Kozelsk fought heroically and was angry proud, because there are a lot of the Mongols killed. It says that Evpaty personally, under the ear, has spent 6 weeks at Kozelsk and was not able to take it, and then passed by abusive storms and code and message in 3 days. The city has taken well, and do not strain for 1,000 Mongols killed, of course a huge exaggeration Kukan, which is unlikely extremely, but the city lost that really very long and evil nickname he received, probably all still not casual. And the last thing, I wanted to tell the story about the invasion of the Mongols in northeastern Russia. This sister bows on wheels heavy tank, from which also may have been to shoot the detachment of troops, since Russian was nothing like this. For them it is all Kamenetsov, it all the vices come name machinery siege. But he now wrote to the vices gathered from vices killed Evpaty Kolovrat his whole squad. Then I think what used against detachment attacked the Mongols. Stella it Chinese these machines field, and they could to inflict heavy losses of troops battles. 2. The Chinese always this was done, and they have the whole history of the military itself is full of messages about how the massive use here is just such a field. Throwing cars became Amitov, and stones cups led to severe losses from the enemy. That was including in the period of the Mongol conquest could perfectly with this tactic were familiar. They were able to do it, and here it is this fact alone which it was impossible to come up. And lay historians do not pay attention because they simply don't understand what it says. I have suggests that although the story of Evpaty the Kolovrat and fictional chroniclers, storytellers much later what happened, but at the heart of this story and lay some real facts, and the real fact that this unit was destroyed by the application of the vortex field Chinese, come name governmental or streamtion of machines, which all were Russia in the total discharge threshold here, that is proud still. Weaken Evpaty of the Kolovrat was then of course all sorts of attempts to struggle. Not all surrendered, not all fled, not all were cowards, as Vladimirovich, son of Prince Vladimir. Many fought to the last. He is the voice suffered heavy losses enough for themselves. They really took care of his soldiers, very much surefire killed any auxiliary troops. But the Mongols themselves felt the heavy hand of Yuri II, and so amazing fact. The Yuan dynasty of the Mongols, using Chinese, took the name of Russian Ryung with names, but alas and alas clear or loss. And they have no Sukhari, but there is another name been not so long ago, I read one the article, where it is very clearly proved that the Chinese themselves to apply to the Russian the name Loti, and demons fierce Rakshasas are here for these here in India such a ferocious, supernatural forces that attack tearing in general. Of course terrible fighters, but they could not, because the Chinese are not with the Russian has faced and will face the Mongols, and the Mongols brought to China these beam. We have for barbecues ferocious night the barbarians who attacked their soldiers, and was extremely dangerous battles. Russian so too are proud of in ending the story campaign in northeastern Russia. Summing up, I must say that Subutai-bagatur did whatever could not neither before not after anyone. He conquered Russia in the winter 1 USA, December, January, February, March for months to 140 years. The glory of the great Subutai-bagatur in 2000 past archaeological conference dedicated Mongolian. The invasion of Russia were strictly on the basis of excavations, on the basis of the facts of history. It has been shown that the traditional version of events as apocalyptic monstrous. In its consequences, invasion, a life-changing Russia into before and after aren't true. And that all these tales, Schlitzer and other miscellaneous Germans invented in the 18th century about the incredible the Mongols, who devastated the country and threw it on the 240 years in rank slavery and ignorance, is all propaganda. All the real facts about light here. The Mongols defeated the surface, the great reign of Vladimir and the Ryazan land 14, the towns taken in February. Even not all of them are supported by the data. Not all archaeological excavations of the city were taken, and not resisted cities such as Dor or Suzdal surrendered without a fight, and they don't destroyed others that have been destroyed, as the wonderful Moscow became in a very short period time, and then began to worry about the heyday of the same city, who after the invasion began to decline, tended to him before the invasion of the reason, not as the Mongols. Not connected. General, there is a lot of interesting things, not going to talk about it. It was just the year 2000. Since then it's been 20 years. Since the facts only accumulate in the confirmation still thoughts of archaeologists, that thus monstrous invasion of the Mongols. After the medieval chroniclers adopted the concept from the hands of the Mongols for themselves, which it was necessary to cover their small troops, legends about the horror and fear of flying ahead of their horse tumans, but all of the medieval legend. All Eastern Russia on the list, who was the Soviet historians, were 20, and for large Korda Great Duchy of Vladimir of these, only 14 were affected by the invasion. If Volga Bulgaria to Central Asia to northern China can speak neat depopulation, the result of invasion in northeastern Russia, and in general in Russia, is generally not significant downsizing. On Bulgaria to Central Asia to northern China can speak neat depopulation. The result of invasion in northeastern Russia and in general in Russia is generally not significant downsizing. On